Hi, this is the fourth video in this short lecture series on schizophrenia and psychosis. And in this video, we're going to talk about causes of schizophrenia. And there are there's no clear one cause and we're done for schizophrenia. There are some things that were believed to cause schizophrenia, and those have been disproven or are highly unlikely. One is the schizophrenogenic mother. Isn't that a word? Schizophrenogenic. So basically the schizophrenia causing mother, and that is from the psychologist Frida Fromm-Reichmann, or of course bad parenting. So there was this idea that bad parenting caused schizophrenia. That was true for all psychological disorders pretty much. If you're ever interested, you can watch I'll skip it for now because I can't remember the name. But anyway, bad parenting and mothers do not cause schizophrenia. The idea here was that the mother was both cold and rejecting and over-involved. So she gave mixed messages and confused the child, and that led to schizophrenia. It doesn't. Another thought was that trauma causes schizophrenia. Now, here we have to think about this because trauma can bring on psychotic features. There can be psychosis as a result of severe trauma. Not all psychosis is schizophrenia, but for a diagnosis of schizophrenia, you have to have psychosis. But we're going to see psychosis in other disorders in this course. So we might see it with trauma, but trauma doesn't cause schizophrenia, not by itself. The other thing that was believed to cause schizophrenia was the emotionally expressive family, especially if, again, mixed messages were given. And none of these have been proven. None of these have any evidence behind them. So we're going to leave those behind and move to what is more likely to be related to the cause of schizophrenia. And what was really found pretty recently in the last 5 years or so was that people with schizophrenia, we knew that there was some tissue loss in the brain. There was no clear understanding of, and that it got worse over the course of a lifetime, so that there would be less and less brain mass in the life of a person with schizophrenia. And it seemed progressive, but there was no real explanation for that. And about 5 or 6 years ago, so there was research that came out about excessive synaptic pruning in schizophrenia. So what we see is perhaps an excessive autoimmune response where microglia are cells in the brain that are not neurons, and their sole purpose really is to clean up, to do brain housekeeping, if you will. So they take care of getting rid of debris, anything that's dead, not being used, left over. So they will clear out dead dendrites maybe, or synapses that are not being used. And pruning, this process of clearing away synapses that are not being used, is necessary, and it happens to all of us in all stages of life, more so when we're very little, around 1 and 2 years old, and then again during adolescence there's a pretty ramped up, you could say, period of synaptic pruning of the synapses in the brain, particularly in the frontal lobe during adolescence. And what we see in schizophrenia is that this pruning doesn't seem to stop. It's supposed to, it becomes, excessive during a certain period, and then it's supposed to stop. And in schizophrenia, it doesn't stop. The pruning continues. The synapses continue to be destroyed and removed. And that's a problem. This would also explain maybe why the onset of schizophrenia is in late adolescence, early adulthood. That was always a question, why why always around this period of time? But sometimes you don't see anything in childhood or early adolescence. And there was a virus theory, but it wasn't quite understood. Just this idea that maybe the mother got a virus when she was pregnant, and the virus was very slow growing. Well, now the idea is that maybe when mother is pregnant, she had a virus, and that virus caused an excessive autoimmune response or an excessive immune response, which triggered this later response for pruning. It would explain a lot of what we see in schizophrenia. So this is probably the most popular belief currently. Now, I didn't put this in the slide, but I want to mention that so if you have an identical twin, and the identical twin has schizophrenia, the other twin has a 50% chance of developing schizophrenia. In the general population, a person has a 1% chance of developing schizophrenia. So, big difference, right? If you have an identical twin with schizophrenia, it's 1 in 2 that you will develop schizophrenia. If you don't have any relatives with schizophrenia, it's 1 in 100. So clearly there's some kind of a genetic component here, right? At the same time, it can't be entirely genetic, because if you have an identical twin with schizophrenia, you only have a 50% chance of developing it. If it was entirely genetic, it would be 100%, right? So there's some genetic predisposition and no real clear understanding. Maybe the virus there's no clear understanding of why that gene might or might not be activated in some people and not in others. What we see correlated with schizophrenia, and that means that we don't necessarily know what causes what. We see elevated levels of dopamine in people with schizophrenia. Now, elevated levels of dopamine will cause psychosis, and they will cause psychosis in anybody. So, for example, in treating Parkinson's disease, we raise dopamine levels. We're not going to talk about that whole thing right now. And one of the side effects of that is that the person might start having hallucinations or delusions. So we have to be careful, right? Well, elevating dopamine is going to cause psychosis. We see it in schizophrenia, but we don't know if the schizophrenia caused the high levels of dopamine or the dopamine caused the schizophrenia. We just know that they coincide. They're correlated. Again, we see the onset in adolescence. We see sleep problems and circadian cycle problems. So people with schizophrenia often will seem to have more of a 25 or 26-hour cycle, sleep-wake cycle. They may be awake at night, asleep during the day. So some problems with sleep. There are other symptoms and related phenomena. I'm going to stop this video here and, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to continue. I want to say that another phenomenon that we see correlated with schizophrenia is poverty. But here we do have a pretty good idea that poverty does not cause schizophrenia, just like trauma doesn't cause schizophrenia. But what we do see is that schizophrenia definitely causes poverty, homelessness, and profound marginalization. So people with schizophrenia who cannot work, maybe, or support themselves, and who maybe become rejected by their family and friends, they fall into homelessness, poverty, and often we will see that people with schizophrenia, partly because of this, are more likely to be victims of violent crimes than the perpetrators. If you're out on the street, you're vulnerable, you're severely mentally ill, you also might be victimized. They're more likely to be arrested for nonviolent crimes, things like disturbing the peace or being homeless, as though that were a crime. And people with schizophrenia today are more likely to be found in jail than in psychiatric hospitals. And that is a treatment issue, and it is a cultural and economic and political issue. So now I'm going to end this video.